Welcome back everyone to Formula 1 2020, your practice report for the Styrian Grand Prix. Lots to talk about today. Practice 1, very eventful. Practice 2, also very eventful. However, the results of Practice 2 today, thanks to there being heavy rain and big downpours tomorrow, looks like if there's a total washout, we may miss Practice 3 and we may also miss qualifying. And as a result, our grid for Sunday's race, where it's supposed to be dry again, bit of a letdown, but we'll leave that there. The grid will be decided by Practice 2 today. So, in theory, we could already have our grid set for the weekend. However, if you're not already subscribed and you want to keep up to date with all Formula 1 2020 news, reviews, practice, qualifying and race sessions, subscribe button is down below. Shall we crack on then with some times? We'll do practice 1 and 2 and then we'll go through team by team and then have a look at your predictions from yesterday's preview video. Practice 1, Sergio Perez, the Racing Point driver, topping the timing sheets for the first time this season, about 1/10 slower than Lewis Hamilton's quickest time in FP1 last week, but only a 10th behind Sergio's time, Max Verstappen, and pretty much only a 10th behind him, Valtteri Bottas and Lewis Hamilton. However, Perez and Verstappen on the soft tyres, Hamilton and Bottas on the mediums. Stroll, P5, looking to cement some points for the first time this season this weekend. Alban, P6. Sainz, Gasly, Ricciardo and Sebastian Vettel all rounded out the top 10. Sebastian Vettel on the soft tyres, all of those other drivers just mentioned on the mediums. Bottom half, Danny Kvyat on the soft tyre compounds, 0.9 away from Sergio Perez's fastest time. Charles Leclerc down in P12 on the medium tyres. Then it was Esteban Ocon on the soft tyres, really struggling in FP1 to match the pace of his teammate. Considering Ocon's quickest lap was on the soft, Ricciardo was 1/10 quicker on the mediums. That is a storyline I want to keep an eye on this weekend. Norris, P14, Raikkonen, P15, then Grosjean, P16, debutant Jack Aitken for Williams, P17 in front of Robert Kubica returning for Alfa Romeo, and Nicholas Latifi and Kevin Magnussen were at the bottom of the timesheets for Practice 1. This afternoon then, before we have a discussion about the teams and drivers themselves, all to play for technically, which again we don't usually say for a practice session, but if this session does determine the grid, Max Verstappen will be on pole position for the first ever Styrian Grand Prix. It'll be Valtteri Bottas joining him on the front row of the grid, then a full Racing Point second row lockout, just like 2018 Belgium. What a story that would be for them. Sainz is P5. Lewis Hamilton down in 6th place. Could never really get a competitive lap time together. Alex Albon, 7th place. 777 away from his teammate. Really struggled in the afternoon session. Lando Norris was 8th, but with a grid penalty, which we'll talk about later on, will drop further down to 11th. Leclerc was 9th, and Ocon rounded out the top 10. The bottom half in the afternoon, and AlphaTauri once again in 11th place. This time though, Pierre Gasly with Danny Kvyat, his teammate, close in behind. Then it was the two Alfa Romeos of Raikkonen and Giovinazzi. George Russell back in the car this afternoon ahead of Sebastian Vettel. How crazy would that be for the grid on Sunday if Vettel was sandwiched between two Williams drivers, Latifi in 17th place. Magnussen and Grosjean rounded out the times for all drivers who set a lap. Daniel Ricciardo failed to set a lap after a huge impact through the penultimate corner into the barriers, losing the car. And we might as well start with Renault. So that's your times. Hopefully that was speedy enough for you guys. But yeah, let's talk about Renault first, because last week they were happy with the car, happy with the balance, and were pretty happy coming away from the weekend with 4 points with Esteban Ocon. But I think when you consider the carnage that was the Austrian Grand Prix, and when you consider the pace that Ricciardo had shown in Q2 and earlier on in the weekend, I think they were disappointed that they didn't pick up more points, and reliability once again seems to be an issue. This morning, Ricciardo was looking okay. He was quicker than his teammate Ricciardo once again inside the top 10 in front of both Ferrari cars, 9th overall. Ocon though, not quite on the level of his teammate, and that certainly has probably played over and carried over from last weekend. And obviously with the huge announcement that Alonso's returning this week, maybe the pressure's ramping up a little bit for Ocon, but certainly in the afternoon session, Ocon was much, much quicker. Actually, only 4 thousandths away from Charles Leclerc in the afternoon, scraping inside that top 10. That'll give him a bit of a confidence boost. But Ricciardo, that incident, what a big incident it was. Ultimately, no laps completed for Daniel in the afternoon, which could mean a 20th or even pit lane start on Sunday, which would be a real shame considering how his first weekend of the season went last time out in Austria. But the team are still hopeful they can have a good weekend, but they will be one of those teams that will probably hope we do get underway with qualifying tomorrow. And Ricciardo, who's pretty nifty in the wet, and Ocon isn't that bad under wet conditions. We never really saw him in a complete downpour of a Grand Prix, nor qualifying for that matter. But we've seen in lower categories, he's not been too bad. So I'm looking forward to seeing them if we do eventually get underway tomorrow and if it is a little bit damp. But for me, I think they're the one team where I really can't place them in terms of their pace, because we've seen in a couple of sessions they look comfortably in that fight for best of the rest, in with the McLarens, the Ferraris, the Racing Points, but other times they look like they're in that mid-pack, kind of where AlphaTauri are. But teams at the bottom, certainly Haas, not looking good. Last weekend, both cars retired with brake failures, and they knew that would be a huge point to focus on not only this morning, but also this afternoon. And whereas a lot of teams were going for those qualifying runs, Haas really needed to put in race runs to try and manage those brakes where possible. They said they were not convinced they'd be able to make it to the end of this weekend's race, even with the cooler temperatures. 18th and 19th, they will start if it stays like this, but the pace, not only their qualifying runs, but also race pace, seems to have gone backwards from last weekend. Makes sense in the fact that they might be able to get both cars to the checkered flag this time, but my goodness, it's not looking good. Whereas teams like Williams and Alfa Romeo looking much, much better. I'll start with Alfa Romeo, Robert Kubica and Kimi Räikkönen in the car this morning. Kimi doing a bit of a better job, 15th place. Only 5 thousandths in front of Grosjean though, so it looks like Alfa are well and truly in that fight with Haas. Robert Kubica 18th, behind the Williams of Jack Aitken. Kevin Magnussen, no laps at all thanks to battery issues. So it looks like those two teams, Alfa and Haas, may be the bottom two teams for the Styrian Grand Prix. And for 2 weekends in a row now, last weekend it was Grosjean, now it's Magnussen. Haas have had one of their drivers completely miss a practice session, which they can't really afford. Williams, though, seem to have moved forward. They're very confident they can even squeak into Q2 this weekend. Russell was saying this morning that Williams weren't able to get a toe on their final run in qualifying, and they think that could be up to 2 tenths per lap. This morning, Jack Aitken in front of Robert Kubica. Aitken doing a solid job. Latifi having a gearbox failure, not so good. But in the afternoon, Latifi was only 400ths away from Sebastian Vettel. And Russell was actually in front of the 4-time world champion, though Vettel was on the medium tyres. Does prove that Williams have made progress. They may be a little bit wary of the Alfa Romeo pair this weekend, but we did see in qualifying trim last weekend, the two Alfas did struggle. So I think Russell really could be in with a big opportunity here to get through to Q2. The two AlphaTauris pretty much kept out of harm's way today. Kvyat and Gasly having a couple of spins in the morning session, but they seem to pretty much be where they were last weekend actually, just outside that top 10 fight. However, in a perfect position to make that alternate strategy work, if that does come into play, if we have obviously a wet conditions tomorrow, that won't really matter because it'll be on intermediate tyres for qualifying. But certainly in the running to fight for those points come race day. And their race pace last weekend, much better than their qualifying pace. In front of that group, maybe it's Ferrari once again. I think, yeah, probably Ferrari. They didn't really have a special day at all, really. Charles Leclerc posting their best finish of the day with 9th place in practice 2. But considering they brought upgrades this weekend, nothing like they're supposed to be next weekend in Hungary, but they still bought a new front wing, still not looking good. Leclerc is trying his best to drag what he can out of that car, and Vettel continues to struggle. Huge lockup this morning, put paid to any real competitive running. And ultimately Ferrari may be fighting at the lower end of the points for 2 weekends in a row. And if Renault, like I said earlier on, if they're better than we're kind of expecting them to be, we're still not quite sure where they fit in. Ferrari may even find themselves outside the points if things don't go their way this weekend. But maybe a bit of rain will help a team out like Ferrari. In front of Ferrari, I think it's probably McLaren. A little bit quieter today. Carlos Sainz doing a very solid job. Lando Norris, however, 8th in practice 2. At practice 1, not only did he finish down in 14th place, also bagged himself a 3-place penalty, overtaking not 1 but 2 cars, Racing Point and AlphaTauri, under yellow flags. Lewis Hamilton got a penalty last week. This week, Lando Norris gets himself a 3-place grid penalty and 2 penalty points on his licence. Did a fantastic job last weekend. Doesn't mean the pressure's off though. He's in a huge fight in that midfield, and retired early on from last year's German Grand Prix, so I'm not quite sure how good Norris is in wet conditions, and that will be a fun one to watch out for tomorrow. Sainz, though, I did mention a second ago, he was very, very solid, but if the grid stays as it is, 5th place overall, this morning looked really strong, 7th place, medium tyres as well, so Sainz could be the McLaren driver this weekend that really takes the fight to the Racing Point. And judging the times today, you would say Racing Point potentially the second quickest team, but I think they're still 3rd, in front of McLaren, in front of Ferrari. Stroll and Perez right on the money. 1st and 5th this morning, that's fantastic. 3rd and 4th this afternoon, looking very, very good for the team soon to be named Aston Martin. Red Bull, a quietish day for them. Of course, they will end up with pole position if things go their way, but Verstappen continuing off from where he left off last weekend before he broke down during the Grand Prix, seems to be just behind the 2 Mercedes boys. Alex Albon, though, a lot of spins this afternoon, not quite on the pace and not quite where he wants the car to be compared to last weekend. So track temperatures changing Albon's feeling in the car a little bit more than it has for other drivers, but his post-race or post-practice interview, he was confident he can still recover for tomorrow. And he is a driver who was very impressive during last year's German Grand Prix. So Albon fans, I wouldn't worry. And Mercedes, trying to mask their pace a little bit, I think. 3rd and 4th this morning. This afternoon, 2nd and 6th. I still think they're the team to beat. They were so far in front of everyone else last weekend. Maybe those issues with their gearboxes and power units from last weekend could carry over to this weekend, so perhaps they are a little bit further behind, but I still think they're the team to beat for tomorrow. And that is pretty much it. I mean, there was plenty of spins, as there always is today. A penalty, Ricciardo in the wall, Latifi breaking down. It was actually very, very entertaining. But before we get onto your predictions for this weekend, submitted in yesterday's video, Formula 2 has just wrapped up, and it's Yuki Tsunoda, the Red Bull youngster, on pole position, followed by Guan Yu Zhou, the Chinese driver, just missing out by 400th of a second. Callum Ilott lines up 3rd, Giotto 4th, much better this weekend from Luca Giotto. Fingers crossed he can actually make it to the grid this time round. Jack Aitken and Schwartzman share the 3rd row of the grid. It's then the 2nd Red Bull young driver, Johan Daruvilla, P7, Renault young driver Lundgaard, P8, Mick Schumacher and Drugovich round out the top 10. That race, of course, is tomorrow after qualifying. Your predictions then. I give you this grid. You give me your thoughts. Pole position, front row, biggest shock from qualifying, winner, podium, first retirement, DOTD, and best of the rest. And the 2 most liked comments from yesterday comes from Nissan Apreti. Qualifying predictions, Lewis Hamilton, pole position. That was a very popular pick this weekend. Bottas sharing the front row. And the biggest shock from qualifying, George Russell making it through to Q2. Race predictions, he's gone from a Lewis Hamilton victory, Bottas making it a Mercedes 1-2, but Alex Albon rounding out the podium. Kimi Raikkonen to be the first retirement, Alban to be driver of the day, and Sergio Perez best of the rest. And Matty Sally, qualifying predictions, has gone with Valtteri Bottas for 2 weeks in a row, Hamilton on the front row with him, but Renault the biggest shock of all. And in his comment, he did mention that he was meaning they were going to be much better than people were expecting. Verstappen, your race winner. Hamilton and Albon on the podium. First retirement, Valtteri Bottas. Verstappen driver of the day. And Lando Norris best of the rest. I'll be back tomorrow for your qualifying report. Will we see one? Will we not? There'll be a video either way letting you know if it's off. Or, hopefully, a wet qualifying. That's absolutely carnage. So stay tuned for that one, ladies and gents. Enjoy the weekend ahead, and I hope to see you in the next one.